Willkommen zum dem Vortrag, den wir jetzt hören werden. Oh, sorry, I should switch to English. So, what we're going to hear now is, in a way, a tale of two kinds of transparencies. Felix Stalder is going to talk to us about this subject matter. He's a professor at the Zurich Academy of Art, and he teaches on digital culture and theories of networking there. And he has published a number of books, most recently an essay that's called The Fight Over Transparency that was published in the journal Open, and I think that's kind of like the basis of what he's going to talk about. So let's give him a big hand and let's begin right away.
Hello, is this on? Yeah. Okay. Thank you for staying through the day and into the evening. As you can see, the title that was in the program, it was rather complicated with top-down and bottom-up and all of that. I'll want to keep it relatively simple, and I will keep it relatively brief so we have some time for discussion. And I want to talk about transparency and power, because we've seen that throughout yesterday and also today, that questions of what can be seen by whom, under what circumstances, is an eminently question of constructing power relationships. So I want to talk about the relationship between transparency and power. So when I talk about transparency, I will not talk about surveillance. We heard a lot about surveillance, but these are totally different things. And they should not be confused with each other, even though they sometimes are. So, oh, now we're transparent. No, we're surveilled. That's something different. And I also will not talk about anything related to post-privacy in this sense of all my actions are on the internet for everyone to see, because I think this is a totally ridiculous and stupid notion. And it only applies to the most boring kind of mainstream lives, and not even there it's a good idea. So what do I mean by transparency? We already heard that, we talked about that in the previous panel. I mean visibility for the sake of accountability. But accountability is not the same as control. Here again is a difference to surveillance. Because surveillance is visibility for the sake of control. It is power based on means of coercion. It's power based on domination and subordination. And in the last instance, it's power based on repression and violence. This is the most common sense of how we understand power. Power is your way to impose your will on someone else, even if that other person doesn't want to. This type of power is located in institutions. And these institutions can be named. This is the Ministry of the Interior, this is the police station, it's the military, it's the prison, it's the school system, the school teacher, and so on. And with this, that you can name the institution that exercises the power, you can also name the people exercising power. And the role transparency plays in a system like this is that it closes or tries to bridge the gap between those inside the institutions who exercise the power, who can force you to do things, and those outside who don't know what happens inside these institutions, and to make the people inside these institutions accountable to democratic forms of control who are located outside of these institutions. This is why we should be very careful about institutions that create their own oversight bodies. Right? We learned a lot of that about kind of secret courts and all of that. This is just no good. So in the classic liberal conception of power, this is located in a state institution, and thus state institutions have a requirements for transparency exactly to make that what happens inside the institution accountable to those outside the institution. And this is a good thing. We need definitely more of it, and the transparency movement to some degree is working on that. And in Austria, where I come from, we still don't even have that. There's still what is called das Amtsgeheimnis, or the Official Secrecy Act is still in place, and, but eventually it will come there too. And we need to fight against attempts to restrict this type of transparency in the name of security or also executive privilege. And WikiLeaks, we heard that, has done a lot of good things on this particular type of conceiving what transparency is and what transparency does. But there's another form of power that has always been there, but it's becoming more important as we move deeper into the network society. And this is what some have called kind of the power of sociability. And it concerns the setting of conditions under which actors can interact. Rather than telling people what to do, which is what classic power does, the policeman tells you, you must. We are talking here about creating a landscape of specific possibility, benefits, and costs, but not about telling people how to behave in that landscape. They're free to do whatever they want, but the landscape may be very uneven to them, but still they're free. This, to some degree, is what Michel Foucault called microphysics of power. But I think we can be a bit more specific than that today. What we are talking about are architectures of incentives. People are not told what to do. They are left alone to figure it out for themselves. But they are acting within a set of constraints and rewards that constrains and rewards certain types of actions and punishes others. But if someone is willing to live with the consequences, they are still perfectly free to choose the punishments or the disadvantages. Let me give you a simple example. Facebook offers you to connect yourself with your friends and people and institutions and whatever you find interesting. If you want to do that, then you have to accept the specific landscape, which comes as a set of tools and a set of policies governing these tools. But Facebook doesn't tell you you need to join Facebook. It's up to you, and you live with the consequences one way or the other. But is this choice really free? Formally it is, but in everyday experience it is not. Because as the famous network effects begin to set in, so everybody is joining these networks, the costs for everyone not joining it escalates. To the degree that you are actually forced to do something voluntarily and out of your own will, out of your own motivations, without anyone telling you that you have to. But you are forced to enter into relationships that you would otherwise not want to enter, but you do it yourself. Facebook is a specific case. And it's a very unusual case, because in this case you have both this network type of power, the power to create the conditions that allow you to constitute yourself and to act. And it is also an institution. It's a very dangerous, very problematic combination. But its real power is not in its institutional form, but its control over the conditions of the network. the power is distributed throughout the network, and it acts through people wanting to join the network and submitting voluntarily to their regime. Out of their own kind of calculus of incentives, yes, it's useful to them. And nobody forces them, and yes, you can leave every day, any day you want, turn off the internet. We heard that yesterday. Turn off the internet, yeah, you're free to do that. But you live with the consequences. And it's really not a free choice. It's really just a travesty of freedom. That's the type of freedom we enjoy in these networks. And in this context, transparency takes on a very different character. In this concept, transparency makes networks manageable by making the actors in it visible in ways that the network and those who control the network can understand. In this process, transparency, contrary to the other case of the institution and its relation to transparency, is not a check on those in power, but it empowers the powerful to extend their already powerful reach even further. But the power does not stem from sovereignty or from means of coercion. Facebook cannot coerce you. But from its superior control of the resources that they can act, and the procedures they have often drawn up themselves in order to make sure that everyone's actions conforms with their interests, even though they're all free to act themselves. And they become even more powerful as others act voluntarily according to the rules that benefit the designers of the network. And now everyone, every day, with their everyday actions, reaffirms and extends these rules and their form of power through their own voluntary actions. But this is not only a question about kind of networks in this technical sense. This is also what free trade agreements do. They set up very unequal relations in which everyone then is free to act, but creates a very specific landscape of rewards and punishments. But once the network becomes a certain size, even those who don't want to join it, also in the free trade case you can see that, are forced to join because staying outside just comes with such high costs. So if you think of the World Trade Organization as perhaps the most powerful or the central example of kind of empire, if you like that term, it's an amazing case that it's a rule or kind of you have to submit or you have to apply to be governed. You have to submit voluntarily. They don't invade your countries, and eventually they will too, but formally they don't do that. You have to apply. You don't have, if you don't want, no problem, but you will be the only one paying taxes. So from this, the French radical collective Tikkun, based on its particular analysis of power in cybernetic systems or in networks, comes to a conclusion that one has to act against transparency. That, in their own words, one needs to become a fog, invisible to the visibility created by the network, to withdraw from the network, to refuse transparency, to create zones of invisibility, to be impenetrable to the global regimes of cybernetic control. Stalder talked about this yesterday a little bit about cutting connections, and he also referred to this notion of the fog, though yesterday he basically talked about that you should be more conscious in managing your connections better and getting rid of the unproductive ones. But the problem with this withdrawal, with this refusal to become visible is that visibility is necessary for social trust. And becoming a fork, to dropping out of the internet, leads to the seclusion of small groups, of clandestine collectives. Tikkun has exemplified that very clearly. And similar, what I see as dead ends of social organization. If there's one great thing about the internet, that it extends social trust, or the possibility of trusting people beyond the private and beyond the institutionally mediated realm. And we really shouldn't give up on that. So dropping out, becoming totally invisible, I think is not a good strategy. So what we need to do is we need to create our own conditions of sociability that are capable of fostering social trust on a large scale without empowering the powerful. Thus, we need to create visibility and limit it at the same time. Because once visibility is created, once the data has been collected, it's very, very hard to control. And while I'm all in favor of cryptography, we are trying to apply cryptography on systems that have already been designed against it. It's very, very difficult and very inconvenient. So it's something that needs to be worked into the networks from the beginning as a design principle, because this is what they are supposed to achieve. One could call that a kind of a reciprocal transparency, meaning that I become transparent to people that are transparent to me, not to people or institutions that are not transparent to me. This is, in the end, a question of network architecture. Just one example before we can start the discussion. Let's think about a system that lets you send and receive messages to your friends all over the world. In the case of unencrypted email in a pre-NSA and a pre-webmail world, this mail is visible that you send to you, to the person you send it to, and perhaps to their email provider, if they watch what's happening on their system. But since there are thousands of email providers, what each of them sees, if they look, is very limited. And everyone can choose and change their email providers as they want without losing their ability to speak to their friends. You can take your address book with you when you change email providers. And if you now encrypt your messages, not even your provider can see them. And Facebook is, as we all know, is very differently. It does provide reciprocal transparency on the surface. I can connect with my friends, and if my friends connect with me. But it creates also other forms of visibility that empowers them, those who control the network, at our expense. Of course, it's not just a question of creating new networks and a different network architecture, even though that's really important. It's also a question of regulation, something that we came about across quite often. We can't simply ignore it, but we need to focus the regulation on the type of network architecture, the type of networks the type of conditions of sociability that we want to create. And one way to do that would be, for example, to mandate interoperability. Why can't I keep my friends when I drop out of a social network? It's this either-or proposition that is totally unacceptable. And it is really forcing people into situations that they would, if they had a choice, not go into. But since they don't have a choice, they're rather in than out. We have done this in other places. For those who are my age or remember, it used to be that you could only connect licensed end devices to your telephone network. They were sold by one particular company because otherwise the network would break. Remember? And that was mandated. The network was mandated, technology was mandated, it was a legal mandate to create interoperability. And why can't we do that with other networks too? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So, are there any spontaneous questions from the audience? Yes, over there.
Hi. Yeah, I fully agree with most of what you said, but there was one point where I got stuck. That WikiLeaks failed to provide accountability from the visibility that they created, and I think that was not a goal of WikiLeaks. That was my understanding. I mean, there was the CCC talk of Assange that he did a couple of years back. He wasn't stuck at the embassy, and he was advocating for this, and I think this worldview was quite interesting, that what he saw was these blogs were just blogging each other. Like, there was one blog that somebody had an opinion, and another guy wrote an opinion on the opinion, and then, just went around in circles. And what he felt was that there was no information, there was raw information that was coming in so people could digest. And what he wanted to achieve with this organization, and since he was the person in charge, that is what I think happened, was that he was just trying to give raw data. His point of view was, you will digest this. The blogs are all there. What he saw was that blogs are there, it's just the information isn't there for the blogs to work.
Yeah, but this is exactly what I mean. In the Anglo context, is this phrase about speaking truth to power. Power doesn't care about truth. It doesn't matter. They really don't care.
But I don't think you can hold them accountable for
this. What you need to do is truth and factual information, what WikiLeaks has done, is very important in then feeding it into systems that actually create accountability, say in a law case or in some other democratic forms. But this translation about factually correct information, truth, to accountability is very, very difficult. And it's not automatic, and it's not just by putting it out that it automatically kind of springs into that. That's the only point that I wanted to make, that this translation is very difficult, and we see slowly a landscape emerging that is capable of making these translations. We heard it before in the panel before, that WikiLeaks itself has been learning from leaks to leak, and also since then a lot of learning has happened, and we see now established partnerships, at least in the media, new actors coming in. You see all kinds of human rights organizations learning to work with that material. So this is happening, but it's not something that comes out of putting this information out by itself. That's the only point that I wanted to make.
All right. I just wanted to make the point that I don't think it was WikiLeaks' fault in a certain sense.
No, I don't think, not one organization can do everything.
Okay, thank you. Then there's a question in the back. Andreas?
Felix, thank you for a very good and interesting, thought-provoking talk. I would like to ask you to speak a little bit more about the notion of accountability and how it is implemented. As you were talking about the models of power, I was thinking, what about organized crime? And not only in the really kind of super bad way, but all those structures which are below the radar of what nation states can control at this moment. That's on one level. And then I also remember that maybe 10 years ago or so, we were maybe at the height of neoliberalism and thinking about a condition of post-governmental organizations where we were seeing a lot of structures emerging in the political realm, in the global political realm, organizations, large companies that were acting outside of nation-state regulations. You're speaking now as though the nation-state was back in power and as though accountability could be implemented on those levels. And this is just a provocation to make you speak a little bit more about the, if not the micropolitics, but the politics of accountability.
Yeah, that was not really, I hope, what I said. Because the only thing that I want to, my main point was to be careful with the concept of transparency, because it often achieves the opposite effect of what you want to achieve it if you think about transparency in a set of institutions. But more and more social processes are no longer organized in institutions, but organized in networks. So this other type of power in which transparency increases the power of the powerful rather than controlling them is becoming more prevalent. And that was my main point. And accountability in the context of transparency only works in this kind of classic liberal sense of you have the state, a set of state institutions, and you can name them, and we need to make sure that we understand what they do, and we have mechanisms to sanction them if they abuse their power and do things that are not supposed to do, through the court system, by forcing people to resign and lose their jobs or other things. But in networks, power doesn't work like this. In networks, you have coercion without anyone coercing you. And there, transparency doesn't help you a bit. That's my main point. And in order to achieve the same effects that you have, that transparency achieves in this institutional sense, that I can say, yes, I want to have transparency about what's going on in the police. I want to see, I want to know if someone is being beaten up in a cell or something like this. If you want to curtail kind of the powerful, you have to do that by creating different networks and not by advocating for more transparency within those networks, because that already the powerful doing for you. And they're doing it because it extends their reach throughout the networks, because they can see everything in the networks, and they have the resources to act in these networks, and they created the networks in a way that whatever you do in the networks, because you have to follow the rules that are set up in the network, be they technical, political, or social rules, that are already favoring certain outcomes over others. I don't say that determining them. Even if the slope is really steep, you still might manage to get up. But it's something very different to get up a steep slope than to play on a level playing field.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from the audience? Yes, over there.
Mainly a small comment or warning when you talked about the differences between Facebook and email. In the end, it sounded a bit that you say demanding interoperability from these providers may be a solution. And I think the big difference between email and Facebook is a company or protocol, a company or product. Email is a protocol, a standard. There's not one application for email. And that's why email is so great, because it's completely decentral. Everyone could run an email server at their home. And thinking in these protocols would be the only solution to get rid of structures like single companies, products or services. And just demanding interoperability from them gets you in the devil's kitchen, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if email would be invented today, you would have the same thing. You would have an attempt of very large organizations to give you great emails, but only within their realm. But email was...
It's the CompuServe model.
Yeah, it's a CompuServe model, right? It's basically what's happening again. There are few actors who believe that they can swallow the internet entirely. And by insisting on interoperability is to exactly to differentiate between the protocol level and the institutional level. To say, yes, we want to have social network protocols, but they cannot be contained within a single institution. Or, let's say it like this, maybe they could, but you cannot use the protocol to enforce that decision. That's the main difference. And if you manage to regulate an API, I think you're doing much better than trying to enforce some privacy policy that you have no way of controlling because you just don't know what happens.
Okay, thank you. I saw that you raised your hands, but I would like to take a question from the Twitter stream because there are a lot of points being made on Twitter, and there's one comment or one question from a tweeter who's called Bernd Dörr. And he asks, what about digital self-discipline against state-controlled voluntariness? Do you have any comment on that? I guess that goes back to the data, the idea of creating as little data as possible.
I'm not a fan of self-discipline. And the reason, I mean, the analogy you can do for self-discipline in that context, I mean, there are good reasons in other contexts, but in this particular one, it's for me, it doesn't hold on all levels, but bear with me. The analogy here would be to tell women what to wear in order to avoid rape. Yeah, you don't wear mini skirts and all of that. Be a bit more self-disciplined about how you appear. I think this is the wrong approach. I don't want to have this level of reflexivity that forces me to think, okay, I'm a totally hostile environment, everyone wants to fuck me, so I really want to be very careful how I appear in public space. I think this is not acceptable.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Now the question over there.
Okay, I would like to ask you about the solution you were offering us at the end.
Can you speak up a little bit?
Okay. Yeah. I would like to ask you about the solution you were offering us. And please correct me if I'm wrong in that, but you were saying that we should only be transparent towards people who are transparent to us. So, in a way, isn't that this kind of quid pro quo situation that forces people into networks and become transparent in that sense you were criticizing?
Not necessarily, because even on Facebook or some other social network, the number of friends you have is a lot smaller than the number of people using the network. But there are points within the network, because it's organized and constructed like this, where someone can see everyone, right? And that's the main problem. But you have to be able to become visible to people you want to become visible. Otherwise, you live in a world where you cannot extend social trust. Because seeing someone and seeing someone also with some aspects of their personal history is an important precondition of trusting people. Otherwise, you're only going to trust people in institutions. Yeah, I don't know who that policeman is, but I generally trust the police, so so that person, the policeman will act accordingly, or I have no idea who that nurse is, but generally hospitals are well-run institutions, so yeah, stab me.
But I guess you're mixing things up there, because I don't have a problem to respect the privacy of my friends. So isn't this more a picture of mistrust when we are standing in front of each other being naked, instead of standing in front of each other being naked and someone completely dressed, because I know I can trust this person and its powers?
Yeah, but why do you trust your friends? Because you know something about them. You have an established relationship of shared experience, of common knowledge, of something on which this trust is based. They were not born your friends.
Yeah, but I guess that everyone has certain secrets. You don't
know. I'm not saying that either you see nothing or you see everything. I mean, that's not what I meant. But you create certain, whatever amount of visibility you want to create towards another person, and that is in some way equivalent to what that other person shows to you. Right? You probably know about as much about your friends as they know about you, roughly speaking. It's not that you know everything and they barely know you.
Yeah,
that's the main point. I'm not saying that
quid pro quo situation.
Yeah, but to some degree, this is how trust evolves. Trust is a quid pro quo relationship that builds over time. You've done something small, you get something back, and you realize, okay, I can probably do something bigger, and you get something bigger back, and then more meaningful trust relationship emerge. Unless they're imposed from outside.
But since you talked quite a bit about designing systems and designing these things into systems, what could a Facebook look like that would match your expectations or your criteria? What could be, in order to have this reciprocal transparency? What could, what do they need to change on a technical level?
I don't know. I'm not a Facebook network designer. But I would be already quite happy if I could choose to communicate with some people who are in Facebook without joining Facebook. That would be already a great thing. Because right now, it's either I'm joined too, or I can't communicate with them. I mean, I'm privileged enough not to have to join, and I don't. But I realize this is not an option for everyone.
But isn't the problem with Facebook also not so much the lack of reciprocity between the users, but rather between user and the company?
Yeah, I mean they on the surface, it's very horizontal, it's very peer-to-peer, it's very kind of friends between each other, and apart from things leaking out because you didn't check your privacy preferences, but on that level, it's very horizontal and very, I see my friends see me, right? But this is only kind of the surface layer. And there are other layers in this network that produce totally different regimes. And I would like to be able to act on this surface level, speak with my friends, but without submitting to all the other layers and the other regimes that also operate there, just not on the surface level. I mean, that's what I meant with interoperability and regulate the API.
I guess most people here would like that option. There's one question over there. Please go ahead.
Thanks for your framework of looking at these architectures this way, and it's making me think about the discussions a little bit that were happening yesterday in terms of this disconnect and this inside and outside. And for me, the Snowden sort of revelations that have showed that the more we participate in the cybernetic culture, the more we are sort of transparent to neoliberal agendas, to empire, things like this, and it is very difficult to conceive of completely disconnecting from the cybernetic culture, and yet I think, what would you think about trying to look at this in terms of a hybrid situation where we are safer from this predatory environment if we attempt to do more things offline, but realizing that we do have to participate in it in a certain way. So, although I don't know enough to speak about tikkun, and it sounds maybe like a bit of a paranoid sort of philosophy, but there's obviously very good reason to be paranoid in the cybernetic culture. So just yeah, again, this question of like, how much can we now think of ourselves existing outside of cybernetic networks and escaping this sort of predatory climate that we're in?
Frankly, for kind of everyday situations, I'm more concerned about Facebook than about NSA. Because NSA is kind of classic state control. And they want to be able that if you ever step out of line, they can come. But as long as you don't step out of line, they don't really care about you. But what Facebook does is they're not in this classic suppression mode. What they want to do is they want to draw the line for you. They want to make sure that the way you act in your everyday life is in accordance to their interest. It's not about this is about regulating, shaping normal life. NSA is about making sure that anything non-normal happens, they can send in the drones. But frankly, I'm more concerned about what these systems do if they work the way they're designed to. And kind of NSA is worrisome, and it certainly curtails kind of our prospect of radical political change. And you've already seen that with Occupy, but if Occupy had been 2 notches more successful, it would have been called terrorist, and all the nice data would have been made to work. But it wasn't necessary. But Facebook does this every day for other reasons. They want other things from you, but they shape the way you perceive yourself, the way you talk to your friends on a very deep level. And this, I think, is more dangerous. Well, it's dangerous in different situations. You don't have to compare it.
Fortunately, the advertising I get on Facebook still has nothing whatsoever to do with my interests, so apparently it doesn't work as efficient yet as the investors might think. There's another question over there.
Hey, thanks for the talk.
I think you have to speak up a little bit.
Okay, does that work? The previous talk was called "What Can We Learn from History?" Blah blah blah. So, what can we actually learn from what Facebook did right, what the protocols did wrong? I mean, we're kind of you're setting up this dichotomy here. There is email, and there are internet protocols, the good ones, and there is Facebook, the bad company. We have had all of this. We've been trying to advocate this. We have email for asynchronous communication. We have chat for synchronous communication. We have websites for self-profiling. We have a friend of a friend as forming a social network. All these protocols have been around for a very large number of years. They have not succeeded. A company, and Facebook was not the first one, but at the moment the most visible one, obviously. Companies have come, bundled all these things, and added their magic ingredient X to them. So I think we should be looking at this X. Why do so many people go for the X? And what can we do about that, rather than look at some, dream world of email that exists, in fact?
Yeah, I mean, when Steve Jobs died, Richard Stallman got into a lot of flack because he said Steve Jobs was the man who made prisons cool. And I think this is, I mean, it's part of the problem. And yes, these are very powerful, very well resourced organizations that know how to work the consumer model. And it's a very attractive model. And for a lot of people, it might be the right model. I don't know. But what you're seeing now is because the way these networks are structured and the network effect is that increasingly, even if you don't like it anymore, the costs of leaving it escalate. So yeah, it's bad, but not as bad as leaving would be. So you have all these lock-in situations. And I think that makes the ability to develop alternatives really, really steep, because you not only have to be somewhat better and more convenient or more interesting, but you also have to replicate the entire network in order to be able to start. Google tries that very hard, and it's probably succeeding in creating a social network without people. But that's what they want to do. They only want your data, they don't want you. So they're fine with you not using Google+, they will just pipe your data into it. It's just another added layer. But unless you make unless you're capable of lowering the costs of leaving, you really constrain the choices in a way that I think are not acceptable. And we have to think about how can we do that? And one part would be, as has been said before, to differentiate between the company and the protocol, and make sure that others can use this protocol even if they're not part of the company.
Okay.
And we've done that. I mean, telephone networks used to be monopolies. We heard that they could only be run as monopolies. They were national monopolies. And then there was heavy-handed legislation that says, no, you have to carry other carriers' messages on your wires. And somehow it worked to some degree, less in Germany than other places, but...
Talking about legislation, there's one thing I would like to hear your opinion about. It's a very old concept. It goes back to 1983. It comes from the Chaos Computer Club. And they had this idea of the Datenbrief, the data letter, meaning every time a company or whoever institution gets your data, saves your data, they have to inform you. That never happened. But to me as a consumer, this sounds so logical. This is what I want, you know. Somehow in 30 years it hasn't happened. It's not even part of the discussion anymore. How do you feel about that? Do you think it's a good idea, or is it another way to make people vulnerable?
No, it's... I think it's a nightmare. I mean...
for the companies.
No, for you. You can do that. I mean, go on your browser and make every cookie set to you, conditioned on you clicking a button. It's a nightmare. You have to click so many buttons so often but they appear all the time. And this is really kind of a cognitive problem, because you have to make a difficult cognitive decision. Which data is being used, for what purposes, for how long, by whom, in order to make an informed choice about clicking yes or no. For something that is, from what you do, is really, really small. Right? Your data, individual data, is worth very, very little, because it's only in the aggregation that it's becoming valuable. So you have to make a lot of complicated decisions about very minor things. And that's really a losing proposition. The same way that this idea that we will sell or pay without data. Our data individually for us is not much worth. I'm not going to negotiate whether my life's history is worth 10 cents or 15 cents. That's just not a way that I think this discussion can be framed. And, you know, seen from Facebook, that's about your value. Or maybe it's $1 or so, but still.
Well, I think Facebook has, 6 billion members? And I looked that up recently, and it turned out that, you know, if you would give the money that they're worth on the stock market, if you would give that money to their subscribers, everybody would get $100. That's something, you know, and then there's another network, another network, another network.
Yeah, but I mean, they're not only your data, they're also a few other things, so you wouldn't get everything. But still, is your life's history worth, say, $50? Mm-hmm. And what kind of question is that?
Can you wait until you have the microphone? Last question.
I think it's worth much more than 15 cents. For example, if you want to a bank loan for something bigger, and the bank can have your data.
Okay, but in this case, who should pay whom? You, the bank, or the bank you, for your life's history?
You pay the bank with your data so that it gives you a better loan.
No, you pay them with interest.
Yes, but you get much less interest because you have your data as the currency. Your data is the currency with which you pay so that you don't have to pay more interest. It's not, I think it's quite clear.
Do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, to a large degree, it's not even about you. It's about where you live, about what group you belong to, all of that. But that is the bank, right? But to these aggregators of data through the networks, the situation, you don't get the loan from Facebook. So the value that they generate per person is very, very small, but they have a lot of people, so it pays off. But if you then have to negotiate this individually with them, I think this is really an insult.
Okay, thank you very much. We have to finish. Again, thanks for listening. Thanks for all the interesting questions from the audience, also on Twitter. We're going to take another 15-minute breaks now, and then there's going to be the final wrap-up of the conference right here. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.